Okay, it's gone 11 o'clock. Let's make a start. I've made sure the mic's actually on this time, which is good. Okay, so last week's lecture, we obviously changed location because of the public holiday. I did set up the lecture to be recorded, but something went awry somewhere and it didn't get recorded. So a couple of you before the lecture had emailed me saying, oh, I've got a clash then with the E-Logistics Institute, and I was like, oh, it's all right, lecture will be recorded, and then it wasn't recorded. So my apologies, but I did actually book it to be recorded. I don't know how they've screwed that up, but please have a read through those notes if you did have that shoot. If you're confused by anything, come and see me, and we can look at what concepts might not have been that clear. Most of you were there, which is great, because you didn't have a clash, so that's okay, but some of you did have another class then, which I'm very sorry that that's occurred. We clashed for 1 hour, so hopefully you made it for the second hour. Okay, so this week we've got our first written report due. So that's due on Thursday, and I've spoken about that a bunch already. What I've not spoken that much about is the peer assessment. Now, these written reports are not long, they're not super complicated, but what they are that's a little bit different is something that's peer assessed. So you'll be reading a few of your peers' work and then giving feedback on what you think they've done well, what you think they haven't done well, so we can all then get better and understand more things in common and just raise everyone's levels up. Now, I will actually be reading an awful lot of them and correcting feedback where I think it's wrong and that sort of stuff. But it's very important that as you look at these and do your peer review, that you are constructive about your criticism. If you just write in a comment, oh, this is not very good, I'm going to then mark you down for not actually doing your job properly. So if they've done a good job, say they've done a good job. If they've not done a good job, you need to say what they've done wrong. You need to actually be constructive around what is not good in their written task. So their second written task, they can do a better job, and their third one, and so on. Now, a large part of the CRA is around referencing and citation. So citation is in the text of the body of the written work, saying where content has come from. That is vitally important. If someone states a fact and they don't say where it came from, they are claiming to be an expert in that area that came up with that fact, which at this point none of you are. Or I imagine that 99% of you aren't. So that means you have to have a citation to say where the facts are coming from. Likewise, we need to have references at the end that then say where all of those citations have actually come from. So as you're writing feedback, that's the sorts of things you should be largely end up being focused on, and around that is the formatting of those citations and the formatting of the referencing. On Milo, there's the style guide for the Harvard style. That's the style we should be using. And so as you're giving feedback, if they're not citing properly, like they've got a citation there but it's formatted wrong, you should then be saying, this is not cited correct, you need to look at page 21 to see how to do a journal citation correctly, or a reference more likely is where the formatting will go wrong. So we need to be constructive. We need to actually say, for things like referencing and citation, where they should look to learn that information from those resources that are on Milo. This is the review that happens after that, which is when you actually get your feedback, you get to then give feedback on their feedback. So this is actually a very useful thing for me because I don't have time to read all of them. The ones I will be looking at first, I'll sample a bunch randomly, but all the ones where this comes back poor, they're the ones I'm then be looking at. So if someone's done a rubbish job in marking it and you get your feedback, you're like, well, this isn't very good. They've said I've not done a very good job, but they haven't said how I can improve. They haven't said where I've gone wrong. Or they've said where I've gone wrong, and the advice they've given me is wrong. You know if someone's telling you stuff that's wrong. So then when you do your review of the peer review, you can then give them a mark on how well you think they reviewed it. Now, if you don't think they've marked you very well, you think, oh, they've given me a bad mark or a mark lower than I wanted, and you're sort of guessing what that mark might be, don't think, oh, I must punish them for that. Because if I then read it, and you have done a rubbish job, your mark's not going up. I just note down your name as the person I'm going to look at the second submission and the third submission to make sure that you're not constantly marking people down needlessly. And I'll actually mark their mark back up again. So all the marks that get given here, I can modify. So if you get hard done by, say it, right? Because that then actually alerts me in the system when you give a this mark, it then aligns them and goes, which marks don't align with what they should be aligning with, they rise to the top. And so I'll then see those. I'll then be picking other ones at random. So across the 3 assignments, I'll be reading your assignment. I just might not read all 3 of them. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions around that peer review / the peer marking initially? Now this gets used in a couple of other units. Who's used this system before in another unit? There's a handful of hands, all right. So it is something you'll get a bit more used to. Now, our major assignment is going to be using another, it's not a peer review platform, another peer assessment platform, where actually I'll still be doing all the marking, but in that one you'll actually get to put a few other comments in about how your group members have worked. So that'll be a different system that none of you would have used before, I'm pretty sure. It's actually, I think I'm the first person in Hobart to use this new one. But yeah, I'll talk about that when the time comes. Now, as I said, first topic's due this week. It's week 4. It's due then. Yes.
When do we start the peer review process?
Yeah, that's what I realised as I was just talking. I didn't say that. So I'll send an email today or tomorrow with the exact times. But basically, when you submit it on Thursday, you're then able to start doing your peer review 24 hours later. So there's a 24-hour period for people to submit late. They'll still get a normal late penalty. But basically, from Friday afternoon, you can start doing peer review. I think that goes through to Wednesday midnight, I think. So you've got just under a week to do it. And then for the review that follows it afterwards, you've got only 3 or 4 days to do that one. I think that might be through to Sunday night. Because that one you're looking at some feedback, and it's much smaller to read. But I'll email through the exact times and dates. A bunch of them are basically by midnight. So they might actually start at like 3 p.m. in the afternoon, but the actual cut-off will then be at midnight. So that you've got night time to do it while you're sitting on the couch watching telly or whatever. Yeah, so I'll email through those dates. You can actually see them in the peer assessment tool. They are actually there. You can actually look at them, but I'll email them around so you can all get them in your email. The second topic and the third topic, both of them actually, are set topics. They're not, hey, everyone come up with a topic scenario. It's actually, there's 4 topics for topic 2, and there's 4 topics for topic 3 to actually choose from. But you actually need to choose in advance what topic you're going to do. So while topic 2 basically starts after Thursday this week, because obviously we've submitted the first one, by the 5th of April, in the assessment tool, you've got to select which one you're going to do. It's not due then, it's not due for another 2 weeks after that. But you've got to select in advance which topic you're going to do. There's 4 topics in total, and I'm not allowing all 180 of you to do the same topic. There's basically 50 people can do each topic. So there's 180 of you. Of the 4 topics, there's like a maximum of 50 can do each one. So there are spare topics. It's not evenly divided, but there are 4 topics, and you've got to choose it by the 5th of April. So when you go to mark them, you'll end up marking topics that aren't the same as yours. So you will then learn about the other areas by reading other people's, which is a lot of what I want to do here. I want you to learn from each other. That is where there's some great benefit here. those 4 topics for this first one, while they're announced and stuff, are around authentication. And that's what we're talking about today. So today's lecture gives us a little bit of a start to think in relation to the bit overarching goals that those 4 topics actually zoom in deep on one particular method. So what we're going to look at is identification, authentication, looking at some authentication factors, and then we're going to sort of come back over those first 2 again and look at them in relation to passive and active. Then we're going to look at passwords briefly and single sign-on towards the end. Now, when we talk about our goals, and we've seen these 2 definitions before, in security we're looking largely at confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But if we look at the definitions that I've had in 501 and already in this unit, these top 2, for confidentiality and integrity, both of them have an A word in there. Both of them have authorised inside of their definitions. And we know that the other usage of A, other than availability, is authentication. So as we look across our definitions, we've got authentication as sometimes the value for A. And if we look at confidentiality and integrity, we've got authorisation built into those. A key part around security is that the authorised people, the owners of the data, are the ones that are able to interact with it, and people that aren't authorised shouldn't be able to interact with the data, depending on what our goals are with them. But that authorised is key. So really what we're looking at today is how does the system work out authentication? How does it do this authorisation? How does it know that you're authorised to look at this data, to change this data, and someone else isn't? Now, we can break authorisation down into 3 steps, and we see our middle goal there. Our middle value is actually one of the goals we've talked about, authentication. So authorisation is the last step in what is commonly a 3-step process. We identify the person, we authenticate that they are who they claim to be or who we think they are, and then we make a decision around authorisation to the content they're wanting. So if they're trying to read a secret document, we first identify who they are, confirm with certainty that they are that person, authenticate them, and then we can check permissions and see, are they authorised? Now that we've established that's who they are, do they have permissions to do what they want to do? Now, this is actually referred to as logical access control. In our second, or our major assignment, we're going to write some policies that have got some chapters involved. One of our chapter headings for that assignment is logical access control. It's a pillar, it's a key foundational part of a security policy. The other chapters are things like network security, logical access control, physical access control, and we'll get into others later, but it's that fundamental. How do we know a person is who they claim to be as they sit down at an ICT system and go to do something? How are we establishing that? Now, the identification phase is often the easiest phase. And we'll get into passive and active systems later. And we'll see that passive systems, the identification phase, is what we're very used to. We are presenting an identity. We go to log into our email, we type in the identity we're claiming. So the identification phase can often be a nothing phase. The person claims, I am this person. When I go to log into the machines, I type in JD Scanler. That's my username. That's me claiming an identity. That is identification. So usually when we're setting up a system that's going to have authentication, that's going to have authorization. We need to put our users in the system, we enroll them, we create them accounts, and often that account, that username, is how they are then able to identify themselves. By typing in a username, they're claiming an identity. We can see that identification in other systems actually might not work that way. The classic kind of case is video cameras on streets, which is incredibly common in China these days for some of those social credit things and whatnot. But the classic case in my mind is things like big train stations in London. The busiest train station in the world is in London, and there's lots of cameras there, and they're constantly looking for terrorists there. And the terrorists aren't claiming an identity, it's then whose face is one of the ones we're looking for. So that identification phase is quite different. They're not claiming the identity, we're looking to identify. So identification is an interesting phase, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we move through the lecture. But the process of claiming an identity, anyone can do. I just said my username, JD Scanlon, JDSCANLA. When I send you emails, it's often there. When you send each other emails, your username is there. It's not particularly private. It's not that hard on a computer system to see who's logged in at the moment. The response that comes back are usernames. So claiming an identity, saying I'm this user, is not a particularly trustworthy thing. It's very easy to claim an identity. It's very easy to look up some usernames. And the finger command in Unix is an example of that. So in passive systems, and we'll get into what passive means a little bit later, the user claims to be, they self-identify as an account. And then what we're then aiming to do is to verify, are they really who they claim to be? Are they really that user they've claimed? Now this is a funny little cartoon. It's pretty old now. It's a classic cartoon in computer security, and nerds like me quite like this. And what we've got here at the bottom is this, what one dog is saying to the other dog. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. This is true, because one of them is teaching the other one about how to use computers. You can tappy away on the computer. My dog can't type, I don't know about yours, but anyway. Online, you can claim any identity you like. You can claim to be whoever you like. No one knows who you are. So when we've got an identity we're claiming, how are we verifying it? How are we validating that this person is who they actually say that they are? And we'll come back around to these two dogs a little bit later. The verification, knowing that they are who they claim to be, is what authentication is about. That is the process of validating the identity, using what knowledge we have about that identity to actually confirm it is them, confirm that they are who they claim to be. And the bulk of this lecture is looking at different techniques of doing that. So, as we're going to spend the lecture looking at them, what are some examples of ways we might validate an identity? Has anyone got any ideas off the top of their head? Password, most common one. Yeah, passwords. Oodles of passwords. What other ones? What was that? Capture's seeing it, yeah, that's more of the dog thing, isn't it? Yeah, so the capture you're seeing, are they really a person or are they a bot? Yep. What about other forms of authentication? Two-factor authentication. Yep, so we're going to talk about that a bunch today. What are some second factors we might use? Because we've got a password, what are some second factors? Biometrics, yep. Yeah, the fingerprints are a very classic one. It's how I unlock my phone on the back, obviously. Anyone got any other ideas? Iris scanner, yep. I've got a thing on here, a little key dongle thing. This is actually YubiKey, which is one of the topics for the second assignment. When I plug this into my computer, It then knows it's me, and I press a little button and it generates a 32-character password. So for me to actually use my computer and use any systems that have any authentication, I need this. If someone stole my computer, they can't actually use any of my systems that have got a password that needs to operate without this to unlock my password safe. Right? There's countless ways of authenticating. The most common way we have for authenticating isn't even digital. When I came in and stood at the front, you all realised it was me. You looked at me. So we actually, for as long as there's been people, we've been doing biometrics in that we do facial recognition ourselves. Oh, that's Joel. He's a lecturer. That's why he's down the front. And so we're going to be moving through from passwords that we have a lot of through looking at some other things. Now, over here, he called out two-factor. Classically, what we have are three different factors. We've got what a user knows, which the first thing that called out was a password. That is the classic case. What a user knows, a password, a PIN number. Things that we've got in our noggins that we type in to prove that we are who we claim to be. Easiest factor. The second factor we have are things that we actually carry around with us. When you guys go to get into the networks lab, you swipe your card on that card reader and it goes beep beep, door unlocks, you walk in. You're carrying a token that says I'm allowed in that room. When you go home to your house, and here's mine, this is the key I will use to get into my house tonight. It is something I'm carrying. This second factor of something we have is not crazy original. We've had keys on our houses for centuries, probably longer. Carrying a token that grants us access is not anything super special if we boil it right down. But he said second factor. If we use something we know, password, and a factor we've got to plug in, we need both bits to authenticate. That's what second factor is about. Three factors when we use in combination with, or our third factor can be is. This is our biometrics. This is a physical characteristic of me that proves that I am who I claim to be. So you guys all recognising this ugly mug and realising that that's Joel, he's the lecturer, that's why he's down the front. Biometrics, the is. That's who I am. So there's some definitions there that are very obvious. So if we come back around to an updated thing on our dog, this was probably, I think this is about 5 or 6 years after that original cartoon. So it was that well known that people were making other cartoons that go along with it. So the dog at the start, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And the website is, hi, welcome to ButcherNet. To download a lean meat recipe, click here. Or to go to the bone marrow page, click here. The dog being a dog, it's like, I love me some bone marrow. Click. Last screen. You're a dog, aren't you? Now, just because we can claim any identity doesn't mean we can prove we are any identity. This isn't about a failure of a password. It's behaviour profiling. It's kind of a biometric-y kind of thing, if anything. The dog is still a dog. The is of the dog enables the website to, aha, you're a dog, I found you. You're not really hiding. We are able to, with all sorts of techniques, find who a person actually is. Can they pass that authentication? Can they be verified as that identity? If we can correctly verify people as being the person they claim to be or not them, we can achieve security. If we can't accurately decipher who people are, it's very hard for us to achieve any of our goals. So we've got our three factors there. And if we use them in combination, we increase our levels of security. If we've just got a password and someone gets that, it's very easy to then pretend to be them. It's much harder without other factors, especially if used in combination. Now, as we move through this unit, we're going to talk about risk analysis. We're going to talk about threat analysis. When we get into those, and we'll actually start those next week, what we end up doing is decide how much effort do we put into authentication? How much do we want the person to prove that they are who they claim to be? So our risk analysis, the output of that might be that we need 1 factor on this thing, or we need 3 factors on this thing. The output of our risk analysis tells us how much we need to verify that identity, that it's so important to our goals. So obviously we need to establish our goals, what are we trying to protect, and we'll delve into all of that in coming weeks as we figure out what we're going to do. But the outcome of this is figuring out what method we're going to use and what are the trade-offs. There's a whole bunch of trade-offs to consider. Passwords are very quick and easy. You know, your mum knows how to use one. Whereas biometrics, sometimes they're easy to use, sometimes not so much, but there's an ethical side to those. Some people are not a fan of biometrics, or they don't want biometrics to be used with children. There's a whole ethical thing there. So that side has to balance with our security goals, and that's where there's some very interesting discussions. So on to passwords for a little bit. We're going to zoom through our 3 factors here. Then we're going to talk about some things we're going to go through again later on in another way. These are quite useful. There's a few definitions or ways we might break them down. We have ones we can use again and again and again, unlimited uses. Sometimes we might have ones that are limited use. We create the account, we get given a password, the first time we sign in it gets changed. So we have some limited use ones as well. All we're actually doing though is testing if they have a piece of knowledge. If that knowledge is not unique to the person, then we're actually not 100% sure we've verified the right person. I know my parents' passwords, so I can log into systems and the systems think I am them. I'm doing it so I can fix their computer when it's broken, but it's knowledge doesn't really establish who a person is. It just establishes they have a particular bit of knowledge. In later weeks, in week 13, we're going to do some cracking of passwords. And at that point in that tutorial, we're going to learn how important construction rules are, how easy it is to break some passwords, that we have to be creative to make a password that's actually hard to break. It's quite common that they get stolen from websites, from other systems we might use, or our operating system, and then get used other places. If they get stolen, that is all the user needs to actually pretend to be you. On that has side of things, we actually use this quite a bit without really being aware of it. Our bank cards are all an example of a token that we have. When we go to an ATM, we can't just type in our PIN number. We have to put the card in first. We're claiming an identity, but at the same time, the fact that we have that card is a has criteria. We're not walking up to it and saying, I'm Joel, here's my PIN number. It's actually, here's a thing that proves I'm Joel, and here's the PIN number. There's lots of one-time code-based things. I've got like 4 of them on my phone. That one's one I use to get into my Bitcoin account. I'm sure a bunch of us probably have these kinds of things for different platforms we might use. This one's obviously from Battle.net, so anyone who plays World of Warcraft or Diablo or their other games probably has one of these. That's examples of UB keys across the bottom. The one on my key is this one, but I've got this one at home. So they're a key generator little token. RFID tags are quite common. I've got friends that have had RFID tags they've put on things, and they need to have one of those items to then use their computer. And so it's a proximity thing, that if they don't have the RFID tag, it won't even let them use their computer. In this space, with the has tokens, what are our attack vectors? Stealing it. If you stole my keys, you get this, plug it in, press the little button, you're good to go, except that there is a password to put in conjunction. So I have this and something I know. But flogging this is probably not a bad step, especially if you can find out my password first, then steal this, then you're good to go. Forgery. The FPOS thing is a classic case for this. Stolen credit card numbers that get printed onto cards is what was very common, and now basically only happens in America because they're a bit behind everyone else. They're just going to chip and pin now, and the rest of us have all had chip and pin for years. So there's lots of examples of forgery around tokens. Biometrics. Now, these are really fun and interesting, and it's a space where you see a fair amount of excitement in general population about them. You know, for example, Apple released their new phone. Everyone goes, "Oh, it does your face." You know, some other Android phones have done similar things for a while. Whenever we go through with our e-passport in Australia, it does a facial thing for the last decade. You know, facial recognition-y stuff isn't actually a new concept. It's been around for quite a while. We'll have fingerprint scanners on our phones, incredibly common. Some people's laptops have a fingerprint scanner on it. Iris scanning as well. So some of these get combined with other factors, like our passport. So I'm going to Singapore in a week or two, and I'm actually in the process of getting a new passport because mine's about to expire. Hopefully it arrives before I've got to go. But that, I have to present my passport, and they scan the little number, and then it does facial recognition. So it's two factors, having the passport and then the facial recognition. It's the two factors there. What kind of threats do we have in this space? Well, my fingerprint is not private. It unlocks my phone, but it's not private. I mean, I've been standing here now at the front for 43 minutes-ish. I've touched this, I've touched that, I've touched this screen, my drink bottle. My fingerprints are everywhere here. It's not actually private. It's not hard to steal a fingerprint off of a surface and then try to use it. We've probably seen that in countless movies and things like that. Or certainly in contexts where a policeman in a movie might get someone's fingerprints and put them. Anyone seen the new Red Sparrow movie? In that, Jennifer Lawrence steals a glass that had scotch in it, got a bunch of fingerprints on it on another spy. She then puts that glass at effectively a crime scene. I won't spoil too much. But then that person, they're like, "Oh, they were there." She frames them because their fingerprints are at the crime scene. So on the biometric thing, it's measures of what we are. So a factor to consider here is if they get stolen, we can't get new stuff. It's very hard to get a new face. I mean, you kind of can, a bit of plastic surgery. It's very expensive, and I don't think you want to have to get, a face job every time someone steals your biometrics. The original concept of measuring people based off of this in sort of a police context was in France in the sort of 1870s. That's what Bertin Menage. I don't speak French, so I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. And what they did there for 2 years before they realised it really wasn't working and stopped doing it was all the criminals, when they put them in jail, they'd measure their height, their weight, their eye colour, their hair colour, the width of their hand, and like 3 other things. So they had about 10 measures on people. And then they were like getting descriptions of crimes occurring. They're going, how tall was he, what hair colour? Well, oh, he's this guy then, because we've got someone that matches those measurements. But they weren't unique. They were way too generalised, and it meant that people kept getting done for crimes that they clearly couldn't have done. So our ratio of how well we can identify one person in a population, that ratio, is it 1 to 100, is it 1 to 10,000, is it 1 to 1 million? That ratio is dramatically important with biometrics. It's really interesting at the moment in court cases around DNA, because we all know our DNA is basically unique, and that's correct. But the accuracy of labs is not 1 to 6 billion. The accuracy of labs is like 1 to 600,000. So there's this very strange thing when there's a few court cases have been turned over when they've actually realised that, oh wait, no, the lab accuracy is why we thought his DNA matched when it didn't. There's been a few cases around that space. So our biometrics are what we are. There's a whole range of ones. There's face, there's fingerprint, hand geometry, iris scan, retina scan, our DNA. But there's a whole bag of issues there. As good as it is to go, oh, it's my fingerprint is not actually private. I'm not a fan of the idea of trying to sign into my laptop with DNA. That sounds like a bit of a dud idea to me. I don't particularly want to give my DNA to whatever company it is that's doing that. But there's a lot of range here. But with all of these, they're basically things we can't change. So we're trying to measure our physical characteristics, which are us. Some of them are a little bit more behavioural, and they're quite interesting. Speech recognition. I don't know how many of you have got an Amazon or a Google Home and things, but Google Home specifically, certainly, can detect your voice and know it's you. So you have it tied into some things that can cost money, and you can order stuff. But if a friend comes over, you don't want them ordering things randomly. So it actually does know who you are. It learns your voice. And in the case of the Google Home, for example, our one at my house detects my voice and knows me and interacts with my accounts. And with my wife's voice, it then interacts with hers. So if she says, add this to my calendar, it goes to her calendar, not mine. It does voice recognition there. So some of those things are becoming incredibly common now. But my voice is my voice. It's changed once in my life. I don't want it to change again. So what the user is. Coming around to a few problems. I've started to mention some of these. Classical problems still exist in this space. So as we think of the problems that can occur with passwords, if we then think about them in the context of biometrics, they still can apply. Key decay, right? The more we use the same piece of authentication, the less well it's secured, the less secure it actually is. If we use our fingerprint on lots and lots and lots and lots of different systems, we've actually spread the model of our fingerprint as represented with dots and circles and lines. That's how it sort of tends to get represented by the system. We end up spreading that model everywhere. That model isn't actually 100% unique. It's actually trying to take a very complicated fingerprint and measure it and store it in a very small amount of information. And so if we use it everywhere, it might then get stolen. A person might find a fingerprint that's very similar or modify theirs into what it matches, and then we've got an attack vector where they can beat our biometric. Faked, as I've already mentioned, it's often not secret information. Some of it might be kind of hard to get. DNA is a bit harder to get than our fingerprints. But things like facial recognition. The picture that goes through with my passport is just a straight-on picture of me. My Facebook and other social things are covered in pictures with straight-on pictures. So from a facial recognition perspective, it wouldn't be hard to actually fake those sorts of things. And we've seen examples of that with Apple's facial recognition stuff. Yeah, putting a bit of plasticine on your face and away you go. So if you get stolen versions, you can then see, well, what happens if it's actually going through to a server and it's about producing the model that matches and then transmitting that model. If someone gets that representation, that stolen digital copy that is the model representation, it is a bit easier to use. So this all boils down to is, has and knows. So our three categories here. For stronger security, we want to use multiple of these. the strongest security we can do is being in the middle with all three factors. So lots of things that we do these days, like our bank, want us to have two factors. So we might put in a password and then we suddenly get a little alert, an SMS on our phone, a code to put in. It's proving second factor in that we have our phone. Second factor, they're more convinced it's us trying to log in, therefore they'll let us in. So two factors are stronger than one, and three is stronger than two. But there's always going to be that cost there. Another one that comes up from time to time, which is kind of definitely in that token sort of category, which can tie in a little bit here, is encryption keys. That's one way we actually prove who we are. That whole public-private key pair scenario we saw introduced in 501, and the way we might sign a digital signature and those sorts of things. Encryption keys fall under that category, and we'll talk about those more later. They are basically a token, a thing we have, but there's a nice little category there that we're using quite different in some contexts. So we're not going to talk about it too much today, but we will see later when we look at protocols that encryption keys are very commonly how we prove who we actually are. So authentication, already said all of that. What we can do, though, is break this down into two halves, passive and active. And that's what we're going to look at in the second half, as we start off at least. So we'll have a 10-minute break there, and we'll reconvene at 8 minutes to 12. But we'll come back in looking at passive and active authentication.